You're listening to Garibaldi Red, a Nottingham Forest podcast brought to you by Nottinghamshire Live. Hello and welcome to the Garibaldi Red Podcast from Nottinghamshire Live. My name is Matt Davis and we're pleased to be joined this week by former Reds boss Sean O'Driscoll. Sean, good afternoon. How are you doing?
Good afternoon. Yes, this is again another Zoom call, although it's not a Zoom call. It's a street yard. Never done street yard before. So we're all getting used to this new technology.
Yeah, how are you finding 2020 lockdown life from a football point of view? Has it been a big challenge work-wise?
It's probably been really innovative for trying to think of different ways to connect with the players and also connect with the coaches. So once the novelty's worn off, then it was getting a bit tiresome. But initially, it was quite exciting, to be honest.
I should say what you do now. Are you running the academy at Portsmouth? Is that a roughly accurate
I'm
description?
Sort of head of coaching and learning, really. Quite a broad range. I'm still trying to work out what exactly my remit is, but it's a challenge.
I mean, we'll talk through your career, obviously focusing on Forest, but you've had quite a varied career management-wise. You cut your teeth at Bournemouth, where you played for so long. Was that, as a manager, that must have been quite an eye-opening experience? Because from what I've read on you, researching up on you, not only were you picking the team and doing the tactics, you were arranging commercial deals and trying to get training kits and dealing with the challenges of a club basically having no money. Was that quite an eye-opener for you? I
think it was. Probably on reflection and looking back it was, but at the time it was just the things that we did. Casting my mind back to that time, it's like most things, you can look through it through rose-tinted glasses, but it was just what we did. It was the way we survived. I suppose those days, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's some lower league clubs where managers and members of staff are doing multiple tasks because that's just the only way that they can run. But it was. I don't know. I was sort of late into football, so I didn't have any preconceived ideas of what you did or what you didn't do. So that's sort of stuck with me right the way through my career. Really, I've not one to something needs to be done. Then it probably needs everybody to pull together to get it done. So it was what it did create was a great camaraderie amongst the staff and the players and the supporters, which I suppose is still there to this day.
You said you were late to football. What did you do in the real world outside? Well, real world, if you know what I mean, outside of football. Yeah,
I was never. I was very sporty, but I went to a school that did a lot of athletics, so we didn't really play football that much. We did, but we didn't. It was half a dozen games a season, so football was never on the radar. So when I left school, it was pick your job, I suppose, more so than anything else. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and ended up being sort of joining an engineering firm as a commercial apprentice, which sounded quite interesting, just going through various departments and then sort of choosing which one you'd like to, that interested you most. Didn't quite work out like that, but I just started playing football with some friends really on a Sunday morning, and within, what was 18? It was probably within 4 years, ended up at Fulham.
Did that come as a surprise to people you worked with then? Were you well into football in your working life, or was it kind of an aside then?
No, my boss was a really big football fan, so my last season when I was playing, probably equivalent to, what would it be now? It would be conference football, I suppose. And the amount of, we didn't do that much travelling really, but things when you play midweek and you had to leave early, or you might get back late at night and you'd come in an hour late. He was really okay with that, so that was quite fortunate. But the the opportunity to join a professional club really came out the blue for everybody. I'd been playing, and probably one of my best friends still is Richard O'Kelly, who knows at Aston Villa, sort of got snapped up by Walsall. And I followed suit to Fulham, so that happened quite quickly.
Did you always think you'd be a manager? Was that something that was long on the horizon, or did you also did that come out of the blue a bit in a sense as well?
Yeah, I was conscious, I think, at the early part of my career of this is going to be, you sign a 2-year contract, and then what happens after that. So I sort of maxed out everything that the PFA could possibly the amount of courses that I've been on is untrue, just because I thought, well, this might end. What can I do? And at the time, the PFA were very obliging in saying, well, we'll pay to go on, this bricklaying course or this plastering course or this HGV course. So, I very soon became quite a consistent user of the PFA services.
Can you, without harping on too much about your time at Bournemouth, but can you outline some of the challenges that you did face, because they're not the club they are now? Were they? You had a lot of off the field financial challenges that the club faced. That must have impacted your work a lot.
I didn't know anything. I had no experiences to fall back on, so it was just the norm. I think the biggest challenge was when we sort of went into receivership and we were close to going out of business, and the club, probably the first club that actually became a community-based club. I think it was a way out of actually keeping the club alive. So the club actually then got the ownership of the club got sort of passed back to almost committee, which is quite difficult when you go to a board meeting and there's about 200 people there. So that was strange, where you've got one faction of people wanting to do one thing and another faction of people wanted to do another thing, and there was never any consensus. And whatever we agreed, when we eventually agreed something, you'd always have part of the group doing their best to scupper whatever we decided. So it was the right thing to do at the time, because it saved the football club. But as it progressed, then it just became a noose, really, to try and move the things forward. And you're forever battling, not so much. It was just almost egos, I think, more than anything else. We didn't have a lot of finance to play with or a lot of choices to make. It was a case of what's the best one for this particular club at this particular time. And some people can, when they get involved in a football club, decision making sort of goes out the window, or good decision making goes out the window. Your
Forest story, in a sense, kind of began at Doncaster, if we can kind of hark back to that season where you were pushing for promotion. It was a happy ending because you did get promoted at Wembley by beating Leeds in the playoff final, but you did miss out to Forest on that final day. What are your recollections of that season? That run-in was very intense, and that final day went against you and went for Forest. What was that like as a manager?
To be fair, we played Cheltenham away on the last game, and I think whether we needed a draw or a win, I'm not quite sure, to be honest. Probably just a draw. And I think it was, and that Cheltenham are still, and was at that time, a really good club, and I knew Keith Downing, the manager. And we were either going to seal their fate, or they were going to stay up, or they were going to seal out. We were going to go into the playoffs or get promoted. So it was a strange day. And it was one of those, I think early on, one of those days where we felt that, and again, I'm not looking back and thinking about it. I can remember at the time thinking, this could be one of the games, no matter what we do, we just can't score. I mean, the ball, I remember the ball hitting the inside of both posts and dropping into the goalkeeper's arms, and thinking, and everybody in football, supporters, players, coaches, managers will know that feeling when you think no matter what we do, the things are not going to go for us. So it was, I don't know, it was, I think I can remember after the game and everybody being disappointed and saying to the players, look, there's a history of teams that finish just outside the automatic places going into the playoffs, and it's usually the team that gets into the playoffs at the last minute as the momentum. So let's get rid of the disappointment, whatever you got to do this weekend. Get it out of the system and let's come back. And the chairman of the owner at the time, John Ryan, was really good because he turned around and said, especially to me, he said, Sean, I've had a dream and we're going to play Leeds in the playoff final at Wembley and we're going to win. So this is just all fate, so don't worry about it. Which at the time I thought, okay, well, it just turned out that way, and he was convinced that he had some premonition that was going to be that was going to be the outcome. So, and that's where it ended up that way. So, pleased for him.
I guess from a fan's point of view, that's the best way to go up at Wembley in the final of the playoffs. From a manager's point of view, I guess you'd have rather gone up automatically and done without the stress. It must be a nightmare in a sense that is it hard to enjoy a Wembley playoff final?
It's hard to enjoy any game. I don't know about just a Wembley playoff. People say to me, what was your feelings after? And it's just relief. And I think that's been reiterated on many occasions with many managers. You sort of worry about things that can go wrong. And I remember at we were really confident we could beat Leeds. I think the players were really confident, not overconfident, but they were really confident. We'd played them twice in the league and done really well against them. So, and we were sort of the underdogs and obviously local Yorkshire derbies. But I think they had an air of confidence about them. And then sort of Richie Wellens sort of pulled up in the warm up and had to have an injection into his backside, anti-inflammatory into his backside to get him onto the pitch, really. So they're the things that you just can't counter for. They're just things that happen, and you've just got to trust your players, and that's what we did.
How did you end up at Forest then? So obviously before you were manager, you had a stint as coach under Steve Cotterill. How did that one come about?
Steve and I go back a long way. Since I was one of the many jobs I did at Bournemouth was be part of the medical team. And a long time ago, the FA did a 2-year treatment of injuries course for ex-players that could work in football clubs. Not as you could actually in lower divisions work as the physio, but more working with a qualified physio. So that was where my career was going to go, really. And Steve had snapped a cruciate in a game, and I just ended up spending a lot of rehabbing him through that, which is quite a long process. So you just get to know people a little bit better and you sort of spend that much time with him. So our paths didn't cross really in football, and I was working with another player, an ex-player of mine, Carl Fletcher, who was manager at Plymouth at the time, and then Steve just rang me up out of the blue and said, would you fancy coming in and helping me to the end of the season? Which was a bit of a no-brainer, really. I was living in the Midlands, so it was an easy commute, bit easier than Plymouth. So that was where it came up. I think, I know Steve had inherited Steve McLaren's backroom staff with Rob Kelly, Paul Barron, and Jimmy Floyd, and I think there was a bit of not tension, but I think like most managers, they want their own people in. I didn't think at the time Forest thought that was, they didn't really want to start paying up 3 different people. So I came in and probably just eased the tension, I suppose, just brought the whole thing together. I think that was my main role, to be honest, just to be a conduit to go, to work with Rob and Paul and Jimmy, who were great, and work with Steve as well, and sort of provide that, I suppose, that line of communication and try and get the best out of everybody, really. And we ended up, I think, if I'm not right, we ended up probably having the best record post-Christmas, apart from Wolves. I think Wolves went up automatically, and I think our record since then was as good as anybody else's. So it worked, and I was, as surprised as anybody when the new owners decided to sort of dispense with Steve's services. For what reason, I still don't know.
Had you left by that point to go to Crawley, or were you still on his staff?
Yeah, Stephen asked me to stay on, but I knew he wanted his own people in there, and it was a case of, I just thought it was a bit of loyalty from his point of view to say, well, you've done really well, we've finished really well, and I just thought, no, you know, this is a chance at the end of the season, to rebuild and or to build from what we'd started and bring your own people in. So that was really the reason. So I was surprised when I heard it. Fawaz had started his regime.
Before we talk about Fawaz and you returning, I mean, what kind of club did you join when Steve was manager? Because if my timelines are right, was it Nigel Doughty wanted out? Money was tight. It didn't sound like a very happy club. Is that a fair assessment, or have I got that wrong?
Yeah, there was. I mean, I wasn't aware, I suppose, of all that. There was unrest, I suppose, but there's unrest at every football club. If you suddenly keep changing managers, the players then. Somebody said to me once, if you were a player and the managers keep changing, why would you put your trust in somebody if you think, well, he might not be there very long? So it was a bit like that. I think the managers and coaches all work differently. So, Steve McLaren will be different to Steve Cottrell. So, it's quite difficult to get used to. This is what one person wants, and this is what another person wants. So I think that creates a problem. So I to be fair, I quite enjoyed being not the manager, if I'm honest, because you could have a different relationship with the players, and I had a sort of a bit of a niche role at the football club. Trying to work across a lot of the departments, the youth department, the reserves, and trying to link in with Paul and Rob and Jimmy, as well as work with Steve. And I think because I'd had a relationship with Steve, then you have a degree of trust that if he needed to go and speak to the board on getting the player in, which he was really good at, and I could take over and organise the training for him, even though I might delegate it to the three other lads. So that worked quite well. The things that were going above that, I wasn't really party to.
So how did you end up as manager then? You talked about Fawaz and you were surprised that he sacked Steve. I remember Fawaz saying he wanted a big name after that, and obviously you've had a good career and you managed in the Championship at Doncaster, but with all due respect, you weren't Ancelotti or whoever they wanted. So how did you end up getting the job?
Yeah, that was said to me from day one, and my whole name is Sean Michael. I'm a Catholic, so Benedict O'Driscoll. So you can't get no bigger name than that one. That was my standard reply to anybody who said that. To be fair, I was working with Steve Coppell at Crawley. He was the, whatever you call it, technical director, and I got a phone call from Forest saying, could you have a word with Steve? Fawaz was a big Man United fan, and they had and he was sort of Steve Coppell's name came up in conversation, and my name, because I was working with him, said, we can contact Sean. And then so I mentioned it to Steve that they would be interested in him being Forest manager, which I duly told Steve about. Steve then went to speak to them in London, and to be fair, asked me along. Said, "Well, you come along. You know the Forest people as well." So I came along and really sat in the corner, being totally ignored while Fawaz and everybody else talked about Man United glory days. And I was just in the corner reading the magazine. And then after it, then we finished, and then I can remember going downstairs and saying to Steve, "Well, is it something that you'd like to do?" And he went, "Not really, but it'd be a good job for you." He said to me, I said, "That's great, Steve, but they don't want me; they want you." Anyway, just 2 or 3 days later, I got a phone call saying they were. I think they were really the pre-season had started. They needed to get something settled. I knew all the players. I knew the backroom staff. And I think I had obviously people at the club who thought that I'd be a good fit. So I think they convinced Fawaz to sign me or to talk to me. And even that was an interesting conversation because I can remember going into the room and they were talking about I can't remember now, but it was something to do with the team and the finances, and I asked a question, and the 3 or 4 people in the room just went off into Arabic, just talk. I didn't know what was going on. It was just as if I'd said something wrong, and they were now being very animated and angry, and then they all stormed off into another room, and their solicitor was there, or their lawyer, and I said to him, what have I said something wrong? And they said, no. I said, but in their culture, they offer somebody something, and it's the culture is to accept it. He said, obviously, you've questioned something, and that's what they're now going to discuss. It's like the fact that you've actually questioned it. It doesn't really matter what you've questioned, but you've questioned something, which is, again...
That doesn't bode well for being a manager, though, does it? Really?
No, it's just a strange. It's a big thing on knowing people's culture and understanding how you go about the things that you have to do. But then they came back, and then we sort of discussed some other things, and the same thing happened, and then so it was a bit bizarre situation. And I left, and then. I just got a phone call saying, they'd like you to accept the job. So I was, I went in there with my eyes wide open. Let's face it. I didn't. It was just I'd enjoyed my time at the club previously with Steve. I knew everybody. It felt comfortable. I think the players had accepted me. And I had a different relationship with them. I could go in as the manager, but they knew me from somebody else. So it was I wasn't like one of the big things about managers are, gaffer and boss and all this business. And they knew me as Sean. So I thought that helped. It made me feel comfortable as well. So we walked through the door, and Rob, who I still keep in touch with now, presented me with, well, by the way, Sean, we've got 5 players from Q8 that the owner wants to sign. Oh, okay. Are they any good? No. So that was my first one. And to be fair to the Q80 boys, they were fine. You talk to them and they go, Sean, we don't want to be here. We're told to come over. It's just that's what happens. And we were away from our families. It's Ramadan. It's pre-season. Fitness-wise, they were way off it. They kept breaking down, and then you couldn't get them into any games or anything. I think we played one of them against Villa, I think, in a pre-season friendly, and I think he lasted 45 minutes and came off with an injury. And then we were told that we had to go to a tribunal to put a case forward to sign them because they were outside the international top, whatever it is, top 20 clubs that you can sign people. But if they're out there, said you've got to have a special case. So that was, again, that was just interesting. Going, well, we're going to try and get, I think it was 3 in the end, 3 Q80s who were Q80 internationals, but work permits for Forest. knowing full well that they didn't fill the criteria. But we had to do it because that's what the owner wanted. So you sort of go through this sham thing where I can remember David asking me, Sean, have you seen these players play? No, David, because they've been injured and not had a chance to get him onto the pitch. Okay. Do you know how much the club are prepared to pay for them? No, nobody's told me that. Well, they've offered them these contracts, which was like, wow. So there's lots of questions like that where I'm just playing, I don't know. So it was, obviously we came out of that meeting and the answer was no, which then was a Mark Arthur, the CEO at the time, had that inevitable conversation with Fawaz to say they've turned down the application for the 3 Q80 boys, which I think was a relief for the Q80 boys. But it, again, it created a bit of a stir.
I suppose I should ask what you made of Fawaz then. I mean, you've added to the stories I've heard about him there in some kind of madcap stuff that was going on. What was your impression of him in those early days when he'd just taken over the club?
I just think he was. I actually, me and Keith Burt, who was the chief scout at the time, we were chatting to him. He had a habit of ringing me up on, I don't know, 3 o'clock in the afternoon and saying, "Can you get down to London to have a meeting?" So okay, so then you jump into a train, get down to London. I'd get down to London and he'd be in bed, and so you'd be sitting there, and then he'd come down in his long, I don't know, they're not pajamas, but it looked like, like a nightgown, and then he'd sit cross-legged and we'd just chat, and there would be no reason really for me to be there apart from he just wanted to chat about football. It wasn't like, there wasn't no detailed question, and it was a case of, so that happened 2 or 3 times when I had to say, look, I've got no problem if you want to arrange your meetings, but ringing him up on the spur of the moment saying, can you get down to London, is a bit, it's a bit awkward. But he, to be fair to him, he didn't say anything wrong in that. It's his culture. I was saying me and Keith offered, because we had no idea what Q80 football was like. So he's telling me that this player and this player are the best players in sliced bread. So we said, well, can we come over and watch a Q80 game? Which he was quite surprised that we'd be prepared to do that. So we flew over to Q8 and watched a game. So we flew over in the morning, watched the game in the evening, and flew straight back. And it was just, there was no midfield play because it was so hot. And it was like, the ball's in one end of the pitch, and then really it just gets transferred to the other end. Nobody's really going to run and chase it. Obviously, a slow tempo. And it was just it's just what you thought it would be. It would take a very special player to be able to adapt from that to coming into the Championship. And like I said, the boys that came over was good as gold. And when you chatted to them, they just understood the situation. Q80 football is different because it's government owned, but the sheikhs sort of adopt a team. So Fawaz's team had won everything because it's a bit like he was prepared to put money into it and get the best players, and so he won everything. That was his, his idea. Well, if he spends enough money, then he just wins everything. That's what happened. So when he came over to Forest, I think he thought he just could apply the same thing. Some of the contracts, I mean, I've never sort of, in my career, I've actually told an owner that you're actually paying somebody too much.
Yeah.
It was almost like I've had a conversation where you need to make a better offer because they're not going to. But to actually say this player's and him wanting to pay the player more than he was actually worth was bizarre. And it didn't understand that it would create a problem. If one player came in and was just ridiculously, unless he was, some fantastic player that everybody accepted, but that wasn't, we weren't trying to go that way. but sort of somebody came in on wages that were way above everybody else's, they all get to know, and it just creates an imbalance. And so we're just trying to keep everything as tight as we could. But again, so it's just different discussions or different ways of doing things that if you he probably didn't learn as quick as he should have learned. That was his biggest problem, and he wanted, he could be easily swayed by people that told him, do this, do that, do this, do that. And there's enough people in football that can spot a naive owner and can milk him for everything that he's probably got. There's some good people. Obviously, there's some people that you've got to be careful of, and I don't think he could tell the difference.
Did you ever think about not taking the job when you were offered it, or was Forest just too big an opportunity to turn down?
No, because I think we'd finished really well. The players, I got on a lot with the players, so we had an opportunity to bring, a couple of, Billy Sharp coming in because he'd fell out with Dean Saunders at Doncaster, and I'm going, it's a no-brainer for me to bring in, somebody that could fire you up to the Premier Division. So that, so we had. And it wasn't going to cost the earth, and so all those things were there. We could do certain things that wouldn't in other clubs would have been a bit of a problem, but at Forest, we could actually work it and not, and still keep a balanced squad. So that was a great opportunity. As I said, it was probably. I don't know, for the short time I spent there, it's probably as enjoyable time as I've had in football.
Was it a good dressing room? I mean, you talked about the challenges of different wages, these Kuwaiti lads walking in and out. Were they hard to manage, or were they a good bunch of lads?
The players are players. They just want. They want you to be honest with them. So, somebody said to me, if it looks like bullshit, it smells like bullshit, tastes like bullshit, it probably is bullshit. So yeah, I was, and it was easy because I was the coach. So I actually had a relationship with where I wasn't the manager, so you can tell them sort of things that maybe the manager's got to be a little bit careful of. So that didn't change. I mean, you asked me in your one of your pre-questions about Lewis McGugan, and I'd always liked Lewis, and like I said, my first conversation was with him that Lewis, you keep falling out with managers, and he said to me, Sean, I don't fall out with managers, they fall out with me. Interesting. But we somebody who's massive potential, and he had a fantastic ability of scoring spectacular goals from 20, 30 yards, free kicks, whatever. That was his signature strength. But at times he overdid it. But what you don't want to do is take that ability away from him and tell him. So I can remember this is what we've got the place together, and we had 4 or 5 clips of Lewis shooting, and I said that look, I don't want this. Lewis has got a great ability that has saved this, got us some points, got us out of jail, whatever. We don't want to take that away from him. But as a group, what will we accept? So I'd show a clip of Lewis shooting from, 25 yards, and the boys would go, actually, these didn't go in, by the way. These went over the bar and whatever.
Yeah.
And they said, no, we'll accept that. That's worth him taking a chance to shoot, and we'll accept that we know that he's not going to score all of them, but he'll score a fair few. And other clips where they went, no, that's too far out. No, you're unbalanced. So they had a say into what they wanted Lewis to do. And then, Lewis has a really then good idea of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, knowing full well. So we didn't take the confidence away from him to say, look, it's an ability and we want you to, if you think it's on, but then if you're unbalanced and you're just doing it because the crowd are frustrated and they want you to have a go from 40 yards, then it's the wrong thing to do. I think that collective of the players actually giving him the license, I suppose, to do certain things, but also give him a structure to work with, I think helps. And that type of thing, I think we did quite a lot. The players, I can remember Dexter saying to me, we're playing Hull at home. We were played sort of 6 people in midfield and had dominated the last 2 games that I'd watched. Absolutely dominated them, and I'd felt we couldn't play. We didn't want to match them up in midfield, but we wanted to play an extra man, and that meant not playing 2 up front. And I remember pulling Dexter and saying, "Dex, I'm not going to play. I'm not going to start. Yeah, I'm going to play an extra midfield player because of this. So it's a tactical thing. It wasn't anything to do with Dex." And Dex said to me, "Sean, you're at the City ground, and they're not going to like you playing one player up front." And I went, "Yeah, okay, I get that." So that was that. I actually appreciated him telling me he wasn't saying he should play. He understood, but he just said, "Look, you might get some stick if you end up losing the game, and you've only played 1 up front," which we ended up losing the game, and I did get some stick. So it was a case of then, well, how do we balance that out? And the players were really instrumental in saying, "Okay, if we're going to play two front players, which they wanted, and we sort of tried to work the midfield to get Chrissy Cohen in and Reedy, Adeline Guardiola, Henry Lansby. We sort of, they've all, a bit like Lewis, they've all you all want to do the things that you want to do, and we want to play to your strengths, but the sacrifice is you need to do some of this as well. You need to do this, you need to do this." So that was, and I think we just probably Leeds, my last game, it was almost like, actually, that's probably as good as we've played. Everybody understood their roles. It happens that we won the game, even if we hadn't won the game. I think there was almost like a belief that actually this is where we can get the best out of everybody. So that was a bit disappointing. That was that very game that my time at Forest came to an end.
We'll come to that in a bit. What are your emotions towards McGugan now in the sense of unfulfilled potential? Does that anger you as a coach, or do you feel sympathy for him? Because he shouldn't be on the scrap heap at his age, should he?
Yeah, I mean, I like the word potential. Right? I mean, people tell me that people are talented, and you go, well, somebody's talented at 12, 13, 14, 21, 22. Where does that talent go? They don't suddenly not become talented. So I like the word potential. He always had potential, and I think it was you've just got he had to find the right place to play, and he maybe was one of those players that wouldn't start every week, or you utilised him for his strengths rather than point out what he couldn't do. So that's probably I'm sort of very wary of blaming players for everything. I think the first thing we have to look at with somebody is, with his ability or how he's been managed and coached, how have we got the best out of him, or we've just said that, well, you can't run from A to B quick enough, or you're not mobile enough, or you're not this, or you're not that, rather than going, how do we utilise him in the team? So his career sort of when he left Forest, went to Watford, I suppose, and then you thought, well, that's a really good move for him, and he initially did well, but there seems to be a sort of trait that he initially does well, but he can't sustain it, whether he gets injured or whether he gets complacent, I don't know. But there's obviously something missing, and that's probably as much to blame from the people who've managed him, coached him, rather than him himself. Sometimes the penny drops with players too late, and that's just a shame. But sometimes we don't. I don't think we allow the penny to drop. We sort of, we don't mean to do it, but I think sometimes we don't connect with the player for him to understand this is where you can actually perform your best, and this is the way you need to do it. You might have a way of that you want to do in your head, but in the real world, that's not going to work too frequently for it to be any use to anybody. But like any boy with ability, it's a shame that he's not still playing. Or if he was at Northampton last time, was he?
Yeah, or knocked back by Port Vale or something like that. Yeah, I recall. Was Lansbury a similar player in a sense? I feel, maybe I'm being harsh on him, but I feel like he could have had a career where he's now playing regularly in the Premier League rather than being on the fringes at Aston Villa. Was he someone who you saw a bit more in than he's delivered, or am I being a bit harsh on him there?
Again, you can only speak from the time you were there, and Henry was really ambitious and felt he should be, which is nothing wrong in that, and felt he deserved to be playing at a higher level, even when probably he hadn't established himself at the championship level yet. I think the time he was with me in Forest, I couldn't fault him really. I think what happened afterwards, I don't know. Some managers suit some players, and some players suit some managers. It's just the way it is.
If we go back to your time when you, just in the big picture, did you feel that squad was capable of going up if you'd had a free run at it or not?
Well, I'm not going to say no, am I? I just think we. I thought we. Again, you'd have to ask the players. I just thought we'd come to a point where we'd ironed out all the foibles, I suppose. Everybody, and we'd settled on a sort of way of playing, I suppose, that suited everybody. That when I first went into the club under Steve, Andy Reid wasn't playing, and yet he was the best player in training every day. I mean, you're never going to chase around and run, but you give him the ball, and he was like, well, how do we get? What was one of my tasks first when I came in. I remember speaking to Andy, saying, "Andy, how do I get you into the team?" So that relationship can follow on when you're the manager, because he knows that he thinks so. So he was, he was really good. Billy came in. Again, it was a no-brainer for me. I just think, I hope that they took a bit of responsibility as well, because we tried to instill that in terms of say, look, this is not about the manager telling you what to do. This is about you understanding your roles. I'll support it, and if you want to, if we need to change things, let's do it together rather than us moaning about it. Well, he doesn't do this, and I'd moan about that. So I think we had that. I believe we had that relationship, which I had at Forest really, and that took a long time to get there. Whereas I think coming in as a coach and they enabled me to shorten that process really a lot, and so we were really constant on giving the players a voice and saying, look, we think this team's good enough, but we've got to play consistently in the championship, and we'll have our blips, and we can add to the team, but getting players in wasn't a problem. Getting the right players in is always the problem, especially with Fawaz, an agent telling him sign this player, sign that player, sign this player, sign that player. That was a difficult thing to manage, and probably didn't do it very well. I can remember signing Simon Gillett, who from the free transfer, 5'4", but he knew me, and I just needed some glue. And when I tried to explain to Fawaz, look, I'm not saying he's the right player for this moment in time, and he knows that, and he knows that there'll be a time when we have to say, Simon, we need to get a better player in there. But he was, it was just right for the time, so he accepted that, totally up front with Simon. And Fawaz wasn't sure, and then he saw him play 2 or 3 games, and then said to me, "Can we double his wages?" I was like, well, "We don't need to." George Friend, we were trying to buy George Friend, and he didn't want him. And then we played Middlesbrough, because he went to Middlesbrough, and he played Middlesbrough. We played Middlesbrough at the City Ground, and he came to me afterward and went to me, "Who's that left back? I like him." That's George Friend, who we tried to buy, but he wasn't. They weren't. I don't know. I suppose they weren't big enough names. A bit like me, they weren't big enough names, so he wasn't interested.
I suppose that leads into one of my questions about: did you ever feel like you were really Fawaz's man? Did you feel like you had that confidence of the owners, which any manager needs? To be fair, don't they?
I don't think anybody felt they were Fawaz's man, did they? I mean, he was a one-off. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure all the other managers since me. I could tell some stories as well, but he was. It was. I think I was the. I remember this sounds conceited, but I think I was the right manager for the players at that time, and probably the staff and the people that were running the club because they knew me. And I took time to go and watch the youth team play and reserves, and sort of took an interest in the club, and sort of tried to. When I first went in there was a lot of. I don't know, not unrest, but it was a case of, the Brian Clough sort of hung over the people that had been managed and played for him, and nothing was ever as good as when Brian Clough was there. And rather than fight against it, I remember inviting Gary Birtles, Kenny Burns, John McGovern, coming in and saying, look, I'd like to chair, this is what we're trying to do. As long as, and make them part of it, really, to say, look, whether you agree or don't agree, I'm giving you an insight. This is what we're trying to do. So, and give them a voice, I suppose, to say, look, you've got great experience. Why can't we utilise it? Kenny was.
I can imagine what sort of kind of story you might.
Well, Kenny just said, when he goes to Derby, they gave him free pints and free drinks and free pies, and I'm going, Forest don't. Okay. I think there was a little bit of, I think the players, because people do columns and write and commentaries and whatever, and everybody's got an opinion, and I think they got sick and tired of sort of Brian's name being sort of not being, I don't know whether that's still the case now, but I say, one of my things was to try and bring them into the club and be part of it, to go, to be able to come into the training ground, have a cup of tea and have a chat. Not just with me, but with the players, to feel as if they were wanted, or they were, they weren't just something from the past, and we couldn't learn from anything from it.
You touched on your departure there. I mean, that your sacking still goes down now as one of the maddest decisions in the recent history of the club, and it kind of, a lot of people, sums up Fawaz's tenure, because I think you were fifth or sixth. You just beat Leeds on Boxing Day. By the sound of it, you wanted to sack you on Christmas Day. I mean, it came out a bottle of blue to the fans. Did you actually see it coming? Did you think your days might be numbered, or was it a total?
No, absolutely. No knowledge whatsoever. In hindsight, because Alex McLeish came in obviously quickly. So if that happens, then usually there's something going on. And then you look back, and we played Peterborough away. I think we won 3-1. And I know Darren Ferguson quite well, so I was chatting to Darren Ferguson, and Alex walks in, and then we play Wolves at Wolves. I think we won 2-1. All my family are there. I'm obviously a Wolves fan as well. And I go up to see my family, and Alex there chatting to my family. So then you think, then you put two and two together and come up with not ex-Man United, but Alex Ferguson. All that, it all links in, really. But I was it was like, again, disappointed, but like I say, I went in with my eyes open. You'd think you'd get the sack because you'd lose games on the trot, or the fans weren't rallying against you, and then okay. But to get the phone call at, I was actually. After the game, Leeds game, I was actually editing a video to watch just the Leeds game of the things I wanted to show the players the next day. It was my Boxing Day or Boxing evening, and so one of those things. But football's football, and I think you can. Life's too short to be bitter. Just get on with it.
And it happened via phone call, I guess, from Mark Arthur. It wasn't face to face. They didn't even.
No. Mark had the inevitable task of doing it, and that's always difficult as well. So,
I guess your emotions, it's a stupid question. You were very angry at the time, I assume. Has that changed with hindsight? Are you a bit more laissez-faire about it and think that's football?
To be fair, I wasn't angry. I was more disappointed, I suppose. I was, I think when I took the job, you got the impression that this could be, you could be a rough ride. But I again, like I said before, my short time there, I enjoyed immensely. My time as a coach, I enjoyed, and I thought we had a sort of Paul, Rob, and Floyd became almost my backroom team. Because I'd built up a relationship with them before, so that worked quite well. So no, I don't do a lot of these things. The media is something that I don't think I'm very good at, and it's like, okay, I'll just leave it in the past. But the fact that I'm doing this probably is an example of, actually, I think maybe I owe just an explanation, or just to get my view of what happened. And no, Forest is one of the probably proudest moments, to stand and just before every game, and hear the Bullock and Tyre, and that is something that I'll treasure.
Well, we're grateful for you doing it. I wanted to ask you about after Forest. I know you had management stints at Walsall and Bristol City, but I was going to ask you about you were you Brendan Rodgers' assistant at Liverpool? Were you his coach?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a different world. That must be, an incredible club to walk into, even if they weren't European champions. I think they had Firmino and Henderson and Milner, I guess. How can you sum up that experience for just the stature and sheer presence of Liverpool?
I was working with the Football Association at the time. I was sort of in charge of the under-19 team, which was probably the most talented set of players I've ever had the pleasure to sort of be involved in. Joe Gomez, Ruben Locust-G, Harry Winks, Izzy Brown. There was just Dele Alli. They were just, it was like, how do I pick a team with all this? Who am I going to leave out? It's a really talented group of players. And then I got a phone call from out of the blue, because I'd just come back from Russia with the under-19s, and I didn't know what had happened at Liverpool. I was unaware, so I was in the garden, and I got a phone call, and Northern Ireland accent, and as you know what football people are like, you take everything with a little bit of a pinch of salt. So I just thought it was a bit of a wind up to start with, and then it ended up being Brendan, who I sort of knew, but I didn't know that well, and asked if I'd be interested. So that was a difficult decision to make, to be fair. Looking back, I must have tried. I remember speaking to so many people, trying to find somebody who would tell me, Sean, stay where you are, don't do it. But I couldn't find anybody. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I'd made I wouldn't. Regardless of what happened there, I wouldn't have made that decision. I think it was, I think you've got to get the right club at the right time. And then probably for me, it was the wrong club at the wrong time. So it was an experience, and the people there, I can remember walking through the first day feeling really nervous, and the gate man, I forget what his name was, the gate man was absolutely fantastic. And somebody said to me, the quality of any organisation will probably represent with the first person that you see. And I remember I was interviewed and I said that, and the first person I saw was the gate man, and he was, I could have been Jurgen Klopp. He couldn't have treated me any better. It was just really nice. But I found it difficult there, I must admit, just to find a niche to understand what I was there for. just again, various experiences that you just go, spent pre-season traveling to Australia, Beijing. I don't know, just thinking this is not pre-season. This is just a commercial tour, and I just couldn't. That world probably doesn't suit me. I'm most afraid. I'm just thinking, well, we've got Stoke in the first game of the season. We played in the last game of last season, and we got beat 6-1. And when I asked, has anybody looked at the footage to sort of analyse? No, it was Stevie G's last game, and they were all going to buy afterwards, so we just forgot about it. I just thought, I don't know. I just thought that was wrong, but yeah, it's fantastic club, and it's fantastic to see him doing so well, and people like James Milner who were there, and Jordan Henderson, who are, I've met some really good pros in my time, but these are these people don't need to do what they do. They're financially secure, but they're just driven. Money's not driving them. It's just trying to be the best they can. I mean, James Milner used to come into training probably 2 hours before anybody else every day. To start his pre-ab, to get ready for training every day, and he just does it. That's the way he works, and I wonder if he's still playing. He looks so fit, but I don't think people realise that. They just see him play and go, "Oh, he's a good player and he's a good character," but the amount of work they put in, staggering. I can remember doing. He said to me, "Sean, can you do some shooting with me afterwards?" Yeah, no problem. So I'm doing some shooting sessions with him, and every time he's missed the target, he's gone and got the ball. And I've gone, wow. And that's what he's always done. He said, I've missed the target, that's my fault, I go and get the ball. You just think, that's something you do with your under 12s, on a Tuesday night. But he was a, fully fledged England international with multiple awards and still driving himself on to go, I should have done better, so I'll go and get the ball. Yeah, fantastic.
Your most recent jobs have been in coaching, working with players to improve them. Is that what you enjoy now? Not the day-to-day pressures of management, not dealing with the media. Is that something that suits you a lot better?
I think improving players is part of the job, whether you're managing. I think that's. I can remember at Doncaster saying to the players, "I'm going to judge you on your performances, not the result," which is like. I must have been talking Swahili because people had never heard that, and we were consistent. So we can come off a game winning, but we judge them on their performance, right? Okay, and we can come off the game losing, and no, we were trying to be consistent. Suited a lot of the players. Some of the older players found that quite difficult. If they came off losing, they expected somebody to throw teacups and rant and rave, and we're going, no, we've actually done no. Somebody's fell over in the last minute, and we've lost 1-0. Our performances have been really good, so we were consistent on it. And I've always said whenever I ask in the media, if somebody can tell me how to play poorly and win consistently, then we'd all be doing it. So the only way you can win is to improve your performances. So it should be performance based, and you just got to deal with all the noise that goes around it. The fact that you're not judged. That was the hardest thing, I think, in management. Arbitrarily judged by a result and what goes on in the media. Man, it's not really fair. So suddenly, I can remember watching just a kids' game on a Sunday morning, and two lads next to me, or two blokes next to me, were talking about Wayne Rooney, and there'd been a lot in the media about his fitness, not the player he was, and they were chatting about it, and I'm just earwigging, and then one of them said something about, "Oh, did you watch the game?" Because England had played the previous night, and he said, "Oh, no, I don't watch football," and yet he spent the last 20 minutes having an opinion on Wayne Rooney, and I'm thinking, because what he'd read in the newspapers, and so I find that a little bit. I still do now, when people make assumptions over people, just because it fits the narrative really more so than anything else. But then you get the same in developing players. People tell you about players, but people tell me that there's no leaders anymore, and yet when I watch people coach, there's multiple. There's instances in so many instances where you can give leadership opportunities to players, and we just don't see them. Or we just, the coaches are a bit reluctant to let go and let the players decide for themselves. So that's where I am at the minute, trying to I'll probably change the view on coaching more so than which will affect players, obviously.
One last aside that I forgot to ask you about beforehand. Did you happen to watch Bournemouth v Forest last night on Sky?
Yeah,
or were you...
Well, to be fair, my missus, I was arguing. I said, I thought you'd ask me this, and said, but Bake Off took the first. I'm not a Bake Off fan, but the Bake Off final had to be on. So I saw bits of the first half and probably most of the second half.
Can you explain or give a bit of insight from a manager's point of view, if you're willing to, about why Bournemouth won the game? I mean, I thought Brooks was a big difference between the sides. Am I oversimplifying it? Or what made Bournemouth so good on the night?
If simply put, this is just a personal thing. Bournemouth expect to win. Forest hoping to win. That's the difference. And I know it's a glib statement, but that's when teams do really well, it's because they expect to win, and you go through phases. Bournemouth at the end of last season, every time they went into a game, they're just hoping they were going to win. And now, so it's, it takes time for that confidence to get into the players. What people do is swap the players because it thinks it's a shortcut, and sometimes you need to swap the players, but trying to instill into a group of players an expectancy, not an overconfidence, not a complacency of expecting to win, I think is a really good skill, and I think the top managers have that. Mourinho's gone in that, and like him or loathe him, he's gone in and and changed the mentality. It's probably a bit of a cliched word, but the Tottenham go into games now expecting to win because he's changed the way they view it, and I think that's quite difficult when you lack confidence or things are not going your way. I can remember again at my Doncaster days when we first got promoted to the Championship. We played Nottingham Forest on Boxing Day, and we were bottom of the Championship at the time, but the confidence in the team and the quality of our play, even though we were bottom, had not been diminished, and the players went into every game expecting to win, even though we weren't winning that many. And we beat Forest 4-1. And I think from that time on, that belief in that we could win every game, even then, there was games then we didn't play as well as the other games we'd lost. But I don't know, there's that fine line between expecting and hoping. Makes all the difference. And if I had to say one thing, that would be it on watching the game. Because you could say they had, a couple of chances in the second half to sort of draw 2-2, but it's almost there's that difference that it's quite hard to quantify. And
so we need to be patient with Chris. Then he's going to need time to turn it around, basically.
Well, I think that's to try to change people's mindsets or to change the way they view it is quite difficult because human beings are complex animals, and I don't know whether it's easier when there's no fans or harder if there's no fans. I'm not sure. There'll be times when clubs of having no fans, okay, for the financial things is difficult, but actually they're in a period of time where actually even no fans has helped them. Where in other times when they're doing really well, and the momentum that the fans behind you gives you an extra boost as well. So difficult times, I think, for everybody.
Well, Sean, thanks so much for giving us so much of your time. Thanks to everyone who listened to this. Do give us a good rating on iTunes and subscribe on YouTube as ever. Thanks for your time. Sean, I hope you enjoyed it. I know you don't do many interviews, but we're very grateful. And I thought you were very good at it, and you gave us some great insight. So thanks. We will catch you soon.
Thank you for listening to Garibaldi Red, a Nottingham Forest podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, then please let us know. We love hearing your feedback. We'll be back soon with another episode. Thanks for listening.